So, what if the traditional map of global power isn't really the whole picture?
That's a great way to put it. It really shifts your perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, because today we're diving into something quite surprising. The role of non-state actors and, well, their huge influence on security around the world.
We get so used to thinking about nations, governments, but beneath that, other forces are really shaping things, profoundly sometimes.
Absolutely. And that brings us right to our focus for this deep dive, Pakistan. Specifically, its long and pretty complex relationship with militant groups.
It's a tangled history. We're going to explore how Pakistan has, strategically used these groups.
Yeah, not just reacting to things, right? But actually using them as a core part of its foreign policy and domestic policy, too, it seems.
Exactly. And to help us navigate this, we're leaning heavily on the research of Christine Fair. She's a security studies expert at Georgetown.
Ah, yes. Her background's quite extensive, isn't it? Our ANDF, U.S. Institute for Peace.
Right. She has a really deep understanding of the political and military stuff in South Asia. So this isn't just theory. It's based on her direct long-term research on the ground.
Okay. So our goal here is to kind of cut through the noise, give you a clear path to understanding this. It's a critical issue.
Well, look at the history. Where did this strategy even come from?
And the geography, where do these groups mainly operate? Afghanistan, India.
And the really nuanced part, how Pakistan seems to differentiate between these groups. Some are assets, some are threats internally.
Yeah, we're hoping to give you those aha moments, that clarity, without, getting totally bogged down in the details. Okay, ready to unpack this?
Let's start at the beginning, because the history is absolutely fundamental here. This isn't some recent development.
Right.
As Fair's work shows really clearly, Pakistan's use of these non-state actors goes right back to its founding. 1947, the first war with India over Kashmir.
Oh, okay, so right from the start.
Right from the start. It wasn't just the official Pakistani army involved. They mobilized irregular forces, Lashkars, they were called then.
Lashkars. And these weren't just like spontaneous uprisings.
No. They got support, logistical help, military backing from Pakistani authorities at different levels. It really set a blueprint.
Huh. So that early conflict kind of laid the groundwork for everything that followed.
It established a major precedent, yeah. And by the 1970s, this wasn't just happening ad hoc. It became more, let's say, formalized, a deliberate strategy.
Formalized how?
Pakistan started actively creating, sponsoring, supporting specific militant factions, the goal, to push its own agenda in Kashmir and also in Afghanistan.
So it moved beyond just reacting to India, to proactively trying to shift the power balance in the region against India, but also Afghanistan.
Precisely. It was about reshaping the neighborhood, you could say. And when you look at where this jihad strategy, as Fair calls it, plays out,
right,
two main places really stand out, Afghanistan and India. And the history and strategy for each are quite distinct.
Okay, let's tackle Afghanistan first. What's the background there? Seems complicated.
Oh, it is. Pakistan's worries about Afghanistan go way back, even before Pakistan existed, back to British colonial times.
How so?
Well, the British Empire saw Afghanistan as this crucial buffer zone, to protect British India, which later became Pakistan, from threats coming from the north and west.
Like Russia.
Or China. Exactly. And think about it. Historically, invaders often came into South Asia through Afghanistan, the Khyber Pass and all that. So that shaped the military thinking.
A kind of geopolitical early warning system, or maybe a defensive depth?
Something like that, yes. And after Pakistan became independent, things with Afghanistan got tense pretty quickly.
Really? How?
Well, in the 50s, Afghanistan actually opposed Pakistan joining the UN, and they even made claims on Pakistani territory, Pashtunistan, they called it.
Wow, okay. So that would definitely focus the minds of Pakistan's military planners.
It absolutely did. It hardened their resolve to build influence inside Afghanistan, to find allies there.
And that leads to supporting militant groups.
Yes. By the 1970s, Pakistan was actively building ties with Afghan militants, Islamist groups. And here's a really crucial point Fair makes.
Okay.
This started before the Soviet invasion in 1979. It's a common misconception that, the U.S. dragged Pakistan to the whole Afghan jihad thing.
So Pakistan was already involved?
Yes. Under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the 70s, they were already making these connections, using elements from Jamaat Islami, for instance. Pakistan had its own strategic reasons long before the Soviets rolled in.
That really changes the narrative, doesn't it? It wasn't just about fighting communism. It was about Pakistan's own regional goals.
Exactly. The conditions were already there. And a key part of this, ideologically, is what Fair calls the Deobandi militant ecosystem.
Deobandi, what's that?
Deobandism is a very conservative interpretation of Sunni Islam. It's been hugely influential on the ideology of many Pakistani jihadist groups, both those focused outward and later inward.
So it's not just geopolitics. There's a strong religious ideology binding these groups.
A very strong one. You have this whole network, mosques, madrasas, which are religious schools, influential scholars.
And these are connected.
Often, yes. They can have links to political parties too, which gives them grassroots reach, helps with recruitment, operations, and everything.
Okay, so Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, how do they fit in with these Deobandi groups?
Now that is where it gets really intricate and, frankly, often contradictory.
Contradictory how?
Well, on one hand, the ISI definitely used Deobandi groups against Afghanistan and against India, too. They were seen as assets. But after 2001, when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and Pakistan came under immense pressure to, cooperate with the U.S. against the Taliban, many of these same Deobandi groups felt betrayed. They saw Pakistan siding with the U.S. as turning against their shared Islamist cause.
So they turned on Pakistan.
Exactly. Groups like the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, started focusing their attacks inside Pakistan, against the state, against civilians. It led to a massive surge in internal violence.
Wow. So the strategic assets became a huge internal security nightmare. Talk of blowback.
A classic case of blowback, yes. Now let's shift to the second main area, India. Fair's research stresses that using militants against India, especially in Kashmir along the line of control, is just as central to Pakistan's strategy.
Right, we hear a lot about groups operating there. Names like Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Those are key examples, yes. Pakistan supported groups like these initially to carry out attacks inside India, particularly Indian-administered Kashmir.
And the goal there, what's the strategy?
It seems to be about using these groups to stir up trouble, to provoke conflict, but doing it in a way that allows Pakistan to maintain, plausible deniability.
Plausible deniability. The ability to say, it wasn't us, basically.
Precisely. Makes it hard to directly link the attacks back to the Pakistani state itself.
And Fair connects this to things like cross-border shelling.
She does. You often see spikes in shelling across the line of control, especially in the fall. Fair argues this isn't just random fighting, it often serves as cover.
Cover for what?
For infiltrating militants into the Indian side. So the shelling creates a distraction, noise, makes it harder to spot the infiltration attempts. It helps maintain that deniability.
So it's a calculated way to raise tensions, maybe provoke India, but keep Pakistan's direct involvement hidden.
That seems to be the strategic thinking. And this brings us to a really vital distinction Pakistan appears to make. The difference between militants focused outward and those focused inward.
Okay, internal versus external threats.
Exactly. And Lashkar-e-Taiba, Let-T, is a fascinating case study here. Fair argues that Let-T is actually, believe it or not, stronger today than it used to be.
Stronger? How? Given all the international pressure?
Largely due to indirect support from parts of the Pakistani state, particularly through its so-called charitable wing, Jamaat-ud-Dawa, or JUD.
The Charitable Front Organization.
Right. JUD has become a really significant player in Pakistani civil society. Pakistan might boast about its vibrant civil society, but Fair points out quite sharply that not all of it is benign.
So JUD provides services, runs schools?
Yes, it runs schools, clinics, provides disaster relief, but all while pushing a very hardline ideology and building this huge institutional network. And what's interesting is Let-T's increased strength hasn't necessarily meant more attacks across the border recently.
So where's the strength going?
It seems to be going into building up its domestic footprint, expanding its base, its infrastructure within Pakistan.
But their main target is still India, right?
Yes, historically, Let-T has focused almost exclusively on external targets, mainly India. They generally don't carry out attacks inside Pakistan, unless...
Unlike the Deobandi groups, like the TTP, who do attack the Pakistani state.
Exactly. And that seems to be the crucial strategic calculation, according to Fair's analysis.
Okay, spell it out for me. This is where it gets really interesting.
The thinking appears to be the biggest internal threat comes from these Deobandi extremists, the TTP, and similar groups. Let-T, focused on India, doesn't pose that same internal danger.
So, by supporting Let-T, maybe indirectly, Pakistan diverts potential recruits.
That's the argument. Every young man who joins Let-T focused on fighting India. Well, that's potentially one less recruit for the TTP who might turn his gun on the Pakistani army or civilians.
Wow. That is some cold, hard strategic calculus right there.
It is. And Fair apparently has a new book coming out based on internal Led-T documents she obtained.
Internal documents. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, apparently they show Led-T sees itself not just as a militant group, but as this disciplined ideological movement
Right.
with long-term goals that, worryingly, seem to align with parts of Pakistan's own strategic vision.
That paints a very different picture than just, random extremists. It sounds much more organized, more embedded.
It certainly does. And this idea of managing different groups leads to another key part of the strategy, what Fair calls strategic ambiguity and denial, especially when they talk about the Taliban.
Right. We hear that term all the time, the Taliban. What's the ambiguity?
Well, Pakistani officials, and often the media too, tend to use that single term, the Taliban, without making clear distinctions between all the different factions.
Factions. You mean it's not just one group?
Not at all. Farah breaks it down. You've got the Afghan Taliban. Their focus is obviously Afghanistan. Then you have the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP. Their main enemy is the Pakistani state itself.
Okay. Afghan Taliban, Pakistani Taliban, TTP. Any others?
Oh, yes. Various splinter groups, other affiliated factions, each often with its own leader, its own specific agenda, sometimes operating in different areas.
But they might share ideology? Or recruit from similar places?
They might share some ideology, yes, maybe draw from similar pools of fighters, but their goals and targets can be very different. Some focus on Afghanistan, some on India, some, like the TTP, on Pakistan.
So by just saying the Taliban, it deliberately muddies the waters.
Exactly. It creates confusion. Domestically, internationally, it makes it much, much harder to hold Pakistan accountable for its ties to any specific group.
So they can condemn TTP attacks, look like victims of terror?
While potentially still managing or even supporting other factions, like maybe parts of the Afghan Taliban, that serve their perceived strategic interests, it's about creating deniability.
That deliberate confusion seems absolutely central to how they manage these incredibly complex and probably dangerous relationships.
It really does seem to be a core part of the playbook. It's remarkably intricate and, as you say, inherently risky.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly recap the main takeaways.
Right. So first, this isn't new. Pakistan's use of non-state actors is deeply rooted in its history, going right back to 1947.
Second, there's that dual focus, Afghanistan and India, each with its own history and strategic logic.
Third, the crucial strategic difference Pakistan makes between groups targeting internally versus externally. The Leti example really highlights that.
And finally, this deliberate use of strategic ambiguity, especially around the term Taliban, to create confusion and maintain deniability.
It all paints a picture of a state strategy that's, well, surprisingly complex, deeply embedded, and full of contradictions.
It really does. And it makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on.
Consider this. What are the real long-term consequences when a state relies so much on these non-state actors for its strategic goals? What are the built-in risks, the contradictions?
Yeah, how does it affect stability, not just for Pakistan, but for the whole region, and maybe even globally, beyond just the immediate goals?
And maybe think about how effective that strategic ambiguity really is in the long run. How hard does it become to tell friend from foe, not just for outsiders, but maybe even for Pakistan itself, something to definitely mull over?